There are moments that define an entire lifetime. For me, it was when the church clock struck noon and I realized the man I loved wasn't coming. What I didn't know was that this abandonment would be just the beginning of a much greater story than I could have ever imagined. My name is Amelia Grace Harper. I'm 82 years old and I live in a small wooden house in Willowbrook, Virginia, the same house my parents left me and where I raised my adopted daughter Lily all by myself. The neighbors know me as Grandma Mia, the lady who always has fresh cookies and wise advice for anyone in need. Few know, however, the pain and triumph that shaped my long life. Before I continue my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop a comment below telling me your city or country. If this is your first time hearing one of my stories, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a thumbs up. It helps more people discover these real-life stories of struggle and triumph. Now, let me take you back to that fateful day in June 1964. It was June 12th, 1964. I remember every detail as if it were yesterday. The sky was the most perfect shade of blue, with just a few cotton candy clouds scattered about. The kind of day every bride dreams of. I was 21 years old, full of hopes and dreams, and about to marry Edward Carter, the handsomest boy in Fairfax County. We had been sweethearts since high school, and after he returned from his military service, he proposed with a small diamond ring that had belonged to his grandmother. I woke up that morning in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by my 3 bridesmaids, my sister Clara, and my 2 best friends, Beatrice and Evelyn. Mum had spent weeks sewing my wedding dress by hand. A beautiful creation of satin and lace with tiny pearl buttons running down the back. It had taken nearly an hour just to fasten all those buttons. But when I looked in the mirror, I felt like a princess from a fairy tale. "You're the most beautiful bride this town has ever seen," my mother said, tears welling in her eyes as she placed my grandmother's veil on my head. Dad stood in the doorway, unusually quiet, his eyes glistening. He'd never been one to show emotion. But that day was different. The ceremony was set for noon at the First Baptist Church, where generations of my family had been married. By 10:30, our modest home was bustling with activity. Neighbors brought covered dishes for the reception that would be held in our backyard. The whole town seemed involved. That's how it was in small communities back then. Everyone knew everyone, and a wedding was a community celebration. At 11:15, my father's old Chevrolet was polished to a shine, decorated with white ribbons to take me to the church. My bridesmaids climbed into another car with my mother, their pastel blue dresses carefully arranged not to wrinkle. Dad and I would follow in a few minutes. "You still have time to back out, Mia," Dad said quietly, as we stood alone in the living room. I laughed, thinking he was making one of his dry jokes. "Daddy, I love him," I replied, straightening his tie. "I know you do, sweetheart. I just want you to be happy." There was something in his eyes I couldn't quite read. Later, I would wonder if he had sensed something I hadn't. We arrived at the church at 11:45. I remember checking the small watch pinned to my bouquet, a gift from Edward. 15 minutes until I would become Mrs. Carter. The church was filled to capacity. Over 200 people had come to witness our union. Through the small window in the antechamber where I waited, I could see the pews decorated with white ribbons and daisies, my favorite flowers. "Has anyone seen Edward?" I overheard Evelyn ask one of the ushers. My heart skipped a beat, but I quickly dismissed any worry. Edward's best man, Harry, had organised a small bachelor party the night before. They probably just lost track of time, I told myself. At 11:55, Reverend Thompson came to see me, his expression unreadable. "Amelia, dear, it seems the groom is running a bit late. Nothing to worry about, I'm sure." But by 12:10, with no sign of Edward or his groomsmen, the murmurs in the church grew louder. Harry's wife came to the antechamber, her face pale. "Harry's not home either. He never came home last night after the bachelor party." My father paced outside, occasionally peering down the street, looking for any sign of Edward's blue Ford. My mother tried to keep the guests calm, making excuses about car trouble. By 12:30, Reverend Thompson suggested we delay the ceremony. "These things happen," he said kindly, but I could see the concern in his eyes. This wasn't just being fashionably late. At 1 o'clock, Edward's mother, Mrs. Carter, burst into tears. "Something must have happened to them," she sobbed. My Edward would never do this. But as 2 o'clock approached, and with the church getting uncomfortably warm in the June heat, the truth became impossible to ignore. Whispers turned into open conversations. Mr. Carter had gone to check Edward's apartment and found some of his clothes missing. Harry's wife discovered their savings account had been emptied the day before. I sat frozen in the antechamber, my beautiful dress suddenly feeling like a costume in some cruel play. My bridesmaids tried to comfort me, but their words didn't register. All I could think was, how could he do this? What did I do wrong? Was there someone else? My father finally entered the room, his face a mask of barely controlled anger. "Amelia, honey, I think it's time we tell everyone to go home." In that moment, something inside me broke. The carefully constructed future I had planned, our little house near the park, the children we would have, the Christmas mornings and summer picnics, all of it crumbled like a sand castle hit by a wave. Reverend Thompson made the announcement, his voice somber. "It appears there will be no wedding today. Please join us in keeping Amelia and both families in your prayers during this difficult time." The pity in the eyes of our guests as they filed past me was almost worse than the abandonment itself. Some awkwardly offered condolences as if at a funeral. Others couldn't look me in the eye at all. My mother's friends quickly dismantled the reception in our backyard, wrapping up food that would go uneaten, taking down decorations that had been hung with such joy just hours before. That evening, as I sat in my bedroom, still wearing my wedding dress, unable to bear the thought of taking it off and admitting the day was real, Sheriff Daniels came to our door. Edward's car had been found at the bus station in Richmond. The attendant remembered selling tickets to two young men heading to New York City the previous night. They had paid in cash. "I'm sorry, Amelia," Sheriff Daniels said, his hat in his hands. "It looks like they planned this. We can file a report, but he didn't need to finish. There was no crime in leaving someone at the altar, only the crime against a heart." That night, I cried until there were no tears left. My mother sat beside me, stroking my hair as she had when I was a child, with a skinned knee or a broken toy. But this wasn't a hurt that could be kissed away. "Why, Mama?" I kept asking through my tears. "Why would he do this?" She had no answers. None of us did. The days that followed were a blur of shame and pain. Our telephone rang constantly, sometimes with well-meaning calls of support, more often with people fishing for gossip. My father disconnected it after the third day. I couldn't bear to leave the house, knowing I was now the subject of every conversation at Jenny's diner and the local drugstore. Letters arrived addressed to Edward. An acceptance to a law school in New York he had never mentioned applying to. A note from his cousin in Queens about an apartment. Pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known we were assembling began to fit together, revealing a picture of betrayal so carefully planned it made my stomach turn. A week after the wedding that wasn't, a letter arrived for me. The postmark was New York City. My hands trembled so badly I could barely open it. Amelia, it read in Edward's familiar handwriting. By the time you read this, I'll be starting my new life. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused, but I couldn't go through with a marriage that would have trapped us both in that small town forever. I hope someday you'll understand that I did this for both of us. Edward. Not love, Edward. Not I'll miss you, not even a proper goodbye. Just a self-serving explanation that explained nothing at all. I burned the letter in the kitchen sink, watching the flames consume his words just as surely as the truth had consumed my love for him. It was the first decision I made as the new Amelia, the woman who would have to build a life from the ashes of the one that had been stolen from her. I didn't know then that 15 years would pass before I would see Edward Carter again. I didn't know the shocking truth he would bring with him when he returned. And I certainly didn't know that the greatest test of my character was yet to come, when I would have to decide whether to offer forgiveness to the man who had shattered my heart on what should have been the happiest day of my life. But that day, standing in my mother's kitchen, watching the last embers of his letter fade to black, I made a promise to myself. This would not destroy me. Somehow, some way, I would find the strength to keep going. I just didn't know how. The summer of 1964 passed in a haze of grief. While other young women my age enjoyed beach outings and drive-in movies, I remained largely confined to my parents' home, the whispers and pitying glances of neighbours too painful to bear. Willowbrook, with its population of just under 3,000, suddenly felt suffocatingly small. Every street corner, every shop window, every church pew held memories of Edward and the life I thought we would share. "Amelia, you can't hide forever," my mother said one August morning as she pulled open my bedroom curtains, letting in sunlight I had deliberately been avoiding. "Mrs. Harlan called the elementary school still needs a secretary, and she thought of you." I stared at the ceiling, unmoved. I had graduated from secretarial school the year before, but the idea of sitting at a desk where everyone could watch poor Amelia, the jilted bride, was unbearable. "I'm not ready, Mama." She sat on the edge of my bed, her face stern but loving. "You'll never be ready if you keep waiting to feel ready. Sometimes you have to do the thing first, and the readiness comes after." 2 days later, I found myself behind the desk at Willowbrook Elementary, typing enrollment forms and answering the telephone with a forced cheerfulness that fooled no one. The first week was excruciating. Parents registering their children would do double takes upon seeing me, their expressions quickly shifting from surprise to that awful sympathy I'd come to despise. "Just look them straight in the eye," advised Mrs. Harlan, the no-nonsense principal who had hired me despite, or perhaps because of, my notoriety. People forget their own curiosity when met with dignity. Slowly, painfully, I began establishing a new routine. Up at 6:30, breakfast with my parents, work from 8 to 4, home for dinner, then long evenings with books or the television, while my mother knitted and my father read his newspaper. It wasn't living, not really, but it was existing. Autumn arrived, painting the Virginia hills in brilliant reds and golds. With it came the news that Harry, Edward's best man and accomplice, had returned to town alone. He showed up at his parents' house one rainy evening, thin and haggard, his grand New York adventure evidently having soured. "He's looking for you," Clara told me one Sunday after church. "Said he needs to talk to you about Edward. I have nothing to say to either of them," I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. But Harry was persistent. He waited outside the school one afternoon, his once handsome face now gaunt, his eyes hollow. "5 minutes, Mia, please." Against my better judgment, I agreed to speak with him at Harlan's Diner, the most public place I could think of. If he had come to offer Edward's apologies, I wanted witnesses. "He's not coming back," Harry said without preamble, stirring his coffee endlessly. "He's married now, some girl from a wealthy family. Her father got him into Columbia law." I felt the news like a physical blow, though I shouldn't have been surprised. Of course, Edward had landed on his feet. Men like him always did. "Her family has connections," Harry continued. "They're setting him up with a position at her uncle's firm when he graduates. He's doing well." "And you?" I asked, surprised by my own curiosity. "Why did you come back?" Harry's laugh was hollow. "Turns out I wasn't cut out for the big city, or maybe the big city wasn't cut out for me. I ran out of money, couldn't find decent work. Edward? Well, his new life didn't have room for old friends from Virginia. I should have felt vindicated by Harry's failure, but all I felt was tired. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm sorry, Mia. I'm sorry I helped him. I'm sorry for what we did to you. His voice cracked. And because Edward wanted me to find out if you'd gotten over him yet, if you'd moved on, the audacity of it. Edward's curiosity about my recovery from his betrayal ignited something in me. Not the old love, not even hatred, but a fierce determination that had been dormant for months. "You tell Edward," I said, rising from the booth, "that Amelia Harper doesn't spend her time thinking about cowards who run away in the night. You tell him I wish him and his new wife every happiness they deserve." I walked out of that diner with my head high, something shifting inside me. It wasn't healing, not yet. But it was the first step toward it. That winter was the coldest Virginia had seen in decades. Pipes froze, schools closed, and neighbors checked on elderly residents as temperatures plummeted below zero. In January 1965, a devastating ice storm left many in Willowbrook without power for nearly a week. My parents and I took in the elderly couple next door, the Thompsons, whose home had become dangerously cold. Mr. Thompson had a bad heart, and the stress of the storm triggered a severe attack. As he lay on our sofa, grey-faced and struggling for breath, I realized I was the only one who could help. With the roads impassable and the telephone lines down, I bundled myself in every layer I owned and set out for Dr. Ellis's house 3 blocks away. The journey, normally a 10-minute walk, took almost an hour as I fought against the wind and ice. When I finally reached the doctor and brought him back, he credited my action with saving Mr. Thompson's life. "You've got grit, Amelia," Dr. Ellis told me afterward. "Ever consider nursing? The hospital in Fairfax is starting a training program in the spring." I hadn't considered it, hadn't considered much of any future beyond my day-to-day existence. But something about the idea took root. Helping the Thompsons had been the first time in months I'd felt something other than numbness or pain. When spring finally arrived, I enrolled in the nursing program, commuting the 20 miles to Fairfax each day. My parents were supportive, if surprised. No one in our family had pursued medicine before. "I'm proud of you, Mia," my father said simply. Coming from him, a man of few words, it meant everything. Nursing school was demanding in ways I'd never imagined. The human body, with its intricate systems and vulnerable fragility, became my focus. There was no time for self-pity when learning how to dress wounds, administer medications, or comfort the dying. For the first time since Edward left, I went days without thinking of him. By 1967, I had completed my training and secured a position at Fairfax Memorial Hospital in the maternity ward. The irony wasn't lost on me. The abandoned bride now helping bring new life into the world. But there was healing in it too. Each tiny face, each new family formed, helped mend something within me. I moved into a small apartment near the hospital, fiercely proud of my independence. My mother worried about me living alone. "A young woman needs protection," she'd say. But I found strength in solitude. My shifts were long and often draining, but purposeful in a way I'd never expected my life to be. The world outside of Willowbrook was changing rapidly. The evening news brought images of Vietnam, of protests and cultural revolutions that seemed to be happening in a different universe from my structured days of rounds and charts. Yet, even our small corner of Virginia couldn't remain untouched by the tumult of the times. In late 1968, the hospital received its first casualties from Vietnam. Local boys shipped back with injuries too complex for military hospitals to handle. Their broken bodies and haunted eyes affected me deeply. I volunteered for extra shifts on the veterans' ward, drawn to their suffering in a way I couldn't fully explain. "You're good with them," Dr. Reynolds commented one evening as I coaxed a young soldier, barely older than I had been on my wedding day, to eat. "They respond to you. I understand what it's like when the future you counted on disappears," I replied, surprising myself with the candor. Dr. Reynolds Thomas became a friend during those long nights on the ward. He was a decade older, divorced, dedicated to his work to the exclusion of almost everything else. We shared coffee during breaks, occasionally a meal after our shifts. He never pushed for more, and I appreciated his respect for the walls I'd built around myself. "You ever think about what's next, Amelia?" he asked one night, as we watched a thunderstorm from the hospital cafeteria windows. After the hurt fades, I considered his question seriously. "I think this is what's next. This work, these patients, that's all." I shrugged. "That's more than I thought I'd have 4 years ago." The spring of 1969 brought tragedy to Willowbrook when a school bus carrying children home from a field trip crashed into Willow Creek during a flash flood. The hospital mobilized every available staff member as ambulances brought in the injured children and their chaperones. I worked 36 hours straight, moving from patient to patient in a fog of exhaustion and determination. Among the most severely injured was 10-year-old Lily Bennett, a small, dark-haired girl who had lost both parents the year before and was being raised by an elderly grandmother. The accident had left her with a broken leg, internal injuries, and no surviving family when her grandmother suffered a fatal heart attack upon hearing the news of the crash. Lily's case affected me profoundly. I spent my breaks sitting with her, reading stories, combing her tangled hair. When she asked, her voice small, what would happen to her now? I had no answer. The state will find a good home for her, the social worker assured me. But with her injuries and age, it might take time. Foster care, most likely. The thought of this fragile child, already so damaged by life entering the foster system, struck me as unbearably cruel. Without fully considering the implications, I heard myself say, what if I took her? Just until she's recovered. The process was neither simple nor quick. As a single woman in small-town Virginia in 1969, my fitness as even a temporary guardian was questioned extensively. Yet something about fighting for Lily awakened a fierceness in me I hadn't known I possessed. You've never even had a child, my mother protested when I told my parents of my plan, and your apartment is hardly suitable. I'll move, I said with a certainty that brooked no argument, and I learned quickly. By autumn, I had relocated to a small rental house near the elementary school, and Lily was officially in my temporary care. Her recovery was slow, the physical healing outpacing the emotional trauma of her losses. Nightmares woke her screaming. Phantom pains in her mended leg kept her from fully participating in school activities. But gradually, cautiously, we built a routine. How long will I stay with you? She asked one evening as I helped her with spelling homework. As long as you need to, I answered carefully, casual, not wanting to pressure her with my growing hope that temporary might become permanent. The process of adopting Lily took nearly 2 years, a labyrinth of home studies, court appearances, and scrutiny of my fitness as a mother. The social worker assigned to our case was initially skeptical. You've experienced significant trauma yourself, Miss Harper, she noted during one of her visits. Are you certain you're emotionally equipped to raise a traumatized child? I think I'm equipped precisely because I understand trauma, I replied, and because I know life continues afterward. In May of 1971, the adoption was finalized. Lily Harper, no longer Bennett, became legally my daughter, though she had claimed that place in my heart long before. The courtroom was filled with supporters, my aging parents, colleagues from the hospital, even Mrs. Harlan from the elementary school. Well done, Amelia, Thomas whispered as we celebrated afterward at a small gathering at my house. You've created something beautiful from pain. Lily's presence transformed my life in ways I could never have predicted. Through her, I formed connections with other parents, joined the PTA, hosted sleepovers that filled my quiet house with girlish laughter. The whispers about poor Amelia left at the altar gradually faded, replaced by Lily's mum or Nurse Harper. The years passed with the rhythm of a child growing. School concerts, science projects, first crushes, teenage rebellions. I continued working at the hospital, eventually becoming head nurse of the maternity ward. My relationship with Thomas evolved into a deep friendship that occasionally verged on something more, though neither of us seemed willing to risk defining it further. By 1979, Lily was 20, a sophomore in college, studying education with plans to become a teacher. My parents had both passed away, leaving me their house in Willowbrook, which I kept but rented out, preferring to stay in the home where Lily had grown up. Life had settled into a pattern I found satisfying, if not exactly exciting. And then, on a rainy April afternoon, as I returned home from a shift at the hospital, I found him sitting on my porch steps, older, greyer, at the temples, but unmistakably Edward Carter. 15 years after he had disappeared from the church, the man who had broken my heart had returned to Willowbrook, and with him a truth that would shake the foundations of the life I had so carefully rebuilt. I stood frozen at the bottom of my driveway, rain plastering my nurse's uniform to my skin, my umbrella hanging uselessly at my side. 15 years had changed him. Silver threaded through his once jet-black hair, lines etched around his eyes. But I would have recognized Edward Carter anywhere, the boy who had haunted my dreams and shaped the course of my life, sat on my porch steps, his expensive suit soaking in the April downpour. "Hello, Amelia," he said, rising slowly as if his body ached. His voice was deeper than I remembered, carrying the polished accent of New York's elite that had replaced his Virginia drawl. 1,000 emotions crashed through me: shock, anger, curiosity, and underneath it all, a strange sense of calm. I had imagined this moment countless times in those early years, rehearsed cutting speeches that would bring him to his knees with remorse. But standing there, water dripping from my hair into my eyes, I felt only a dull surprise at my own composure. "You're trespassing," I said flatly, walking past him to unlock my front door. I stepped inside, but didn't close the door, an invitation he didn't deserve, but that my ingrained politeness couldn't withhold. He followed me into the small living room where Lily's college textbooks lay scattered across the coffee table alongside my nursing journals. His eyes took in the modest furnishings, the framed photographs of Lily from infancy to graduation, lingering on a recent Christmas picture of the two of us laughing by the tree. "Your daughter?" he asked, gesturing toward the photos. Yes, I didn't elaborate. Whatever his reason for appearing after 15 years of silence, he hadn't earned the right to Lily's story. I went to the kitchen, methodically filling the percolator and setting it on the stove. The familiar ritual steadied my hands, gave me something to focus on besides the ghost from my past standing awkwardly in my living room. "You look well," he offered, as I returned with 2 mugs of coffee. I laughed. A short, humourless sound. "What are you doing here, Edward? Surely you didn't travel all this way to comment on my appearance." He accepted the coffee, but didn't drink, instead cradling the mug between his palms as if seeking its warmth. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows. "My wife died," he said abruptly. "Cancer 3 months ago." "I'm sorry for your loss," I replied automatically. The words I'd spoken to countless grieving families at the hospital over the years. And I was sorry. Sorry that anyone should face that particular pain, even him. "We had a good marriage," he continued. 15 years, no children. She was kind, better than I deserved. I waited, sensing there was more. Edward had always had a flair for the dramatic, for building up to revelations. When she was diagnosed, terminal from the start, she made me promise something. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "She made me promise to make things right with you." "There's nothing to make right," I said coolly. "What's done is done. We've both built lives that took us in different directions." "That's not entirely true, Amelia." His voice dropped, almost a whisper. "I haven't been honest with you about why I left." Part of me wanted to stop him there, to preserve the narrative I'd constructed over 15 years, that Edward had simply been a coward, seduced by the bright lights of New York and the promise of wealth. That explanation had been painful but comprehensible, something I could package neatly and set aside. But another part, the nurse who had learned to face difficult truths, the mother who had taught Lily the value of honesty, recognized that whatever Edward had come to say, I needed to hear it. "Go on," I said. Edward sat down his untouched coffee and reached for the briefcase he'd brought with him. From it he withdrew a thick manila envelope, softened at the edges as if it had been handled often. 2 days before our wedding, I received this. He slid the envelope across the coffee table toward me. It was delivered to my apartment by a man I'd never seen before. He said he worked for Marcus Langley. The name hit me like a physical blow. Marcus Langley had been Willowbrook's wealthiest resident, owner of the textile mill that employed half the town, including my father. A powerful man with a reputation for ruthlessness in business and pleasure alike. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, grainy, black and white, but unmistakably showing a young woman with a much older man in various compromising positions. The woman's face was clearly visible. My mother. "There were 50 more like those," Edward said quietly as I stared in horror at the images and documents, financial records showing your father had been embezzling from the mill for years. Langley's man made it very clear. If I married you, these would be made public. Your father would go to prison. Your mother's indiscretions would be known to everyone in town. My head spun. My father, honest to a fault, who counted every penny of change at the grocery store, a thief. My mother, pious proper, who considered dancing too risque, involved with Langley. It seemed impossible, absurd. "This is a lie," I whispered, pushing the envelope away. "A cruel fabrication." Edward shook his head slowly. I thought so too at first. I confronted Langley the next day, told him I would go to the police, expose his blackmail attempt. He laughed in my face, said he owned half the police department in the county. He paused. Then he showed me more evidence. Dates, amounts, bank account numbers, your parents' signatures. It was compelling. Why? I managed my voice, barely audible. Why would Langley do this? Edward's jaw tightened. Because I had refused to sell him my grandfather's land, the 100 acres outside town that bordered his property. He wanted to expand the mill, and I was the obstacle. He made it clear. Give up you and the land, or watch your family be destroyed. The pieces began falling into place. My father's sudden retirement from the mill just months after my failed wedding, the way my mother had withdrawn from church activities, their insistence on moving to Florida for her health in 1966, where they had lived quietly until their deaths. "You could have told me," I said, anger finally breaking through the shock. "We could have faced it together." Langley was explicit about that. If I warned you or your parents, he would release everything immediately. I had less than 48 hours to decide. Edward's voice cracked. I thought I convinced myself I was protecting you. That a clean break, even a cruel one, was better than watching your family name drag through the mud. Your father imprisoned your mother. He couldn't finish, so you ran with Harry. Edward nodded. Harry was never supposed to be part of it. He caught me packing, demanded answers. When I told him, he insisted on coming with me, said he couldn't face you knowing the truth. And the letter? That self-serving garbage about not being trapped in a small town? Langley's idea, he said it would help you hate me, make a clean break. Edward's laugh was bitter. He was right about that, at least. Silence fell between us, heavy with 15 years of consequences from decisions made in desperate haste. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving only the rhythmic dripping from the eaves. "Why now?" I finally asked. "After all this time, why come back with this? Because Langley is dead. He died 6 weeks ago." Edward leaned forward. "And because on her deathbed, my wife made me promise to tell you the truth," she said. His voice faltered. "She said no one should live their whole life believing they weren't enough when the truth was something else entirely." I stood abruptly, needing distance, movement. My world had tilted on its axis. The past I thought I understood suddenly revealed as a carefully constructed lie. What did this mean for the narrative I'd built around my abandonment? The strength I'd found in overcoming it? Amelia, there's more. I turned back to him, wondering what possible revelation could follow what he'd already shared. After Langley died, I went to his office, searched his files. I found this from the briefcase. He withdrew another envelope, newer than the first. The photographs of your mother were staged. Professional models made to look like her through retouching. The financial documents were forgeries, expert ones, but forgeries nonetheless. I sank back into my chair. "What are you saying? Your parents were innocent of everything. Langley fabricated all of it to manipulate me." Edward's face was ashen. "I gave up our future based on lies." The room seemed to spin around me. All those years of pain of rebuilding myself from the shattered pieces he'd left behind. All because of a powerful man's greed and a young man's fear. "Get out," I whispered, my voice deadly quiet. "Amelia, please, get out," I screamed, the force of it tearing at my throat. 15 years, Edward. 15 years I spent believing I wasn't enough. That something was fundamentally wrong with me. That the man I loved had found me so lacking he couldn't even face me to say goodbye. He stood, gathering his briefcase with shaking hands. "I'll leave the envelopes. All of it. You deserve to have the proof." At the door, he paused. "I'm staying at the Willowbrook Inn for a week. If you want to talk more after you've had time." When the door closed behind him, I collapsed onto the sofa, my mind reeling. The foundation of my adult life, the abandonment that had shaped me. The strength I'd found in its aftermath suddenly felt built on shifting sand. If Edward had been protecting me rather than rejecting me, what did that mean for the woman I'd become? I don't know how long I sat there, lost in the implications of his revelations before the front door opened again and Lily's voice called out, "Mom!" Why is there a strange man sitting in his car outside our house crying, "Lily, my anchor, my redemption"? Whatever truths Edward had brought with him, they couldn't change the most important reality of my life. The daughter who had healed me in ways I hadn't known I needed healing. "It's a long story," I said, wiping my eyes and attempting a smile. "A very long story." That night, after Lily had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with both envelopes before me. The fabricated evidence that had destroyed my wedding day. The proof those fabrications were lies. 15 years of my life, redirected by malice and deception. I thought of the path I hadn't taken. Marriage to Edward. Perhaps children of our own. A life in the small house we'd planned to buy near the park. Would I have become a nurse? Would Lily have found her way to me? The telephone rang, startling me from my reverie. It was nearly midnight, too late for casual calls. Amelia? Thomas's voice was concerned. I just got off shift and heard Edward Carter is back in town. Are you all right? The genuine worry in his tone brought fresh tears to my eyes. This was my life now. A career I loved. A daughter who was thriving. Friends who truly cared for me. Would I have had any of it if Edward hadn't left? He came to see me. I admitted it's complicated. He had his reasons, Thomas. Ones I never imagined. Do you need company? I can be there in 20 minutes. I considered the offer. Thomas had been my steadfast friend for a decade. Always there when I needed support. Never pushing for more than I could give. No, but thank you. I need time to think, to process. After hanging up, I returned to the envelopes. With deliberate movements, I gathered the photographs, the forged documents, the proof of their falsehood, and carried them to the fireplace. One by one, I fed them to the flames, watching as the lies that had shaped 15 years of my life curled and blackened, and finally disintegrated into ash. The truth, I realized, was both simpler and more complex than the story I told myself. Edward hadn't rejected me. He'd been manipulated into believing he was protecting me. My parents hadn't been the people I thought, but neither had they been the people Langley painted them as. And I had built a life on the foundation of an abandonment that was both real in its impact and false in its motivation. As the last document turned to cinders, I made a decision. Tomorrow I would go to the Willowbrook Inn, not to forgive Edward. I wasn't sure forgiveness was possible for 15 years of absence. But to understand, to hear the full story, to learn what had become of the boy I had once loved enough to marry. And perhaps in that understanding, I might find a way to reconcile the woman I had become with the woman I might have been, and discover they weren't as different as I had always believed. The Willowbrook Inn hadn't changed much since its construction in the 1922nd. The same faded burgundy carpet in the lobby, the same oak registration desk polished to a high shine, the same slightly musty smell that greeted me as I pushed through the revolving door. The elderly clerk recognized me immediately. "Nurse Harper, is everything all right?" His concern was genuine. In a town this size, the head maternity nurse typically only visited the inn when a guest had taken ill. "Everything's fine, Mr. Ellis. I'm here to see Edward Carter. Could you ring his room, please?" His eyebrows shot up, but to his credit, he said nothing as he dialed the room. Small towns have long memories, and my abandoned wedding was still the stuff of local legend. 5 minutes later, I sat across from Edward in the inn's nearly deserted tea room, a pot of Earl Grey between us growing cold. He looked as if he hadn't slept, dark circles beneath his eyes, his usually immaculate appearance slightly dishevelled. "I didn't expect to hear from you so soon," he admitted, "or at all, honestly." I wrapped my hands around my teacup, drawing strength from its warmth. "I burned the envelopes last night, all of it." Alarm flashed across his face. "But the proof? I don't need proof, Edward. I've lived with one version of the truth for 15 years. I'm not interested in preserving another version on paper." I met his gaze steadily. "What I want is to understand everything. From the beginning. For the next 2 hours, as the spring sun climbed higher in the sky and the tea room slowly filled with the lunch crowd, Edward told me the complete story. The days after Langley's messenger delivered the envelope, his desperate attempts to verify the contents, the veiled threats against not just my family, but me personally. He knew people in New York, Amelia, powerful people. He said, if I didn't do exactly as he demanded, you'd never work in any hospital in the country. Edward's voice was hollow with remembered fear. He said he could make sure no nursing school would accept you, that your career would be over before it began. So you sacrificed us to save me. I said, not a question, but a statement. I did what I thought was right at the time. He passed a hand over his face. I was 23, terrified, with less than 2 days to decide. I convinced myself it was noble, sparing you the scandal, protecting your future. A bitter laugh escaped him. I've had 15 years to realize it was also cowardice. I should have fought harder, found another way. I thought of the frightened young man he had been, barely more than a boy, really, facing down one of the most powerful men in the county. It would have taken exceptional courage to defy Langley, courage few 2-3-year-olds possess. What happened after New York? I asked. He told me about his law school years funded by his new wife's family, about his career at her uncle's prestigious firm, about the drinking problem that developed in his 30 seconds, the nightmares that had never fully subsided, the therapy that had helped him understand the trauma of his own coerced choice. Margaret, my wife, she knew something was broken in me. I told her about you, about Willowbrook, about 5 years into our marriage. During one of the bad periods, his voice softened. She was extraordinary, Amelia. She could have left, found someone whole. Instead, she pushed me to heal. She sounds remarkable, I said, meaning it. She was. For the first time, genuine emotion colored his voice. When she was diagnosed, she made me promise not just to tell you the truth, but to make amends however I could, to free myself from the past as much as you. As he spoke, I studied the man before me, so different from the boy I had loved. Edward had achieved everything he might have wanted in material terms, the successful career, the connections, the wealth evident in his tailored clothes, and the expensive watch on his wrist. Yet there was a hollowness about him, a sadness that all his achievements hadn't erased. Tell me about your daughter, he said suddenly, as if reading my thoughts. In the pictures, she looks happy. You both do. For the first time since sitting down, I smiled genuinely. Lily is my miracle. She came to me when we both needed saving. I told him about the bus accident, about her injuries, about our gradual bonding as I helped her heal. Adopting her was the best decision I ever made. You're a mother, he said wonderingly. I always knew you would be a wonderful mother. The simple observation, spoken with such certainty, brought unexpected tears to my eyes in our youthful plans. We had talked of having 4 children, had even chosen names for the first boy and girl. And you? I asked, blinking away the moisture. You and Margaret never had children. A shadow crossed his face. We couldn't. Complications from a surgery she had as a teenager. He twisted his wedding ring absently. We discussed adoption, but the time never seemed right. My career was demanding. Then her health began to decline. I recognized the regret in his voice, having heard it from many patients over the years. The particular grief of roads not taken, chances missed, that can haunt a life even when that life has been successful by external measures. "What do you want from me, Edward?" I asked finally, the question that had been hovering between us since his reappearance. He looked startled. "I don't want anything from you, Amelia. I came to give you the truth, not to take something more from you. But you stayed a week, you said." "Why?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I suppose I wanted to see if there was a way forward. Not to reclaim what we lost, that's impossible, but perhaps to find a kind of peace with it for both of us." As I walked home from the inn, the warm May afternoon wrapped around me like an embrace. I turned our conversation over in my mind. Edward had come seeking absolution. That much was clear. But could I give it? Should I? The question haunted me through dinner with Lily, through my evening routine, through the sleepless hours that followed. The next morning, I called the hospital and for the first time in my career requested a personal day. Then I did something I had avoided for 15 years. I drove to the First Baptist Church where Edward and I would have been married. Reverend Thompson had long since retired, replaced by a younger man I knew only slightly. The church was empty at that hour, the morning light filtering through the stained glass windows, casting colourful patterns across the worn wooden pews. I sat in the back row trying to reconcile the crushing pain of that long-ago June day with the complex truth I now possessed. Nurse Harper, the young Reverend's voice, startled me from my thoughts. "Is everything all right?" "I'm not sure," I replied honestly. "I'm wrestling with forgiveness, Reverend, the complicated kind." He sat beside me, this man young enough to be my son, and listened as I shared the broad strokes of Edward's return and revelations. "Forgiveness isn't for the other person," he said when I finished. "It's a gift you give yourself, a way of putting down a burden you never should have had to carry." His words stayed with me as I left the church and drove not home but to the Willowbrook Inn. Edward was surprised to see me again so soon. "I need to show you something," I said without preamble. "Will you come with me?" 20 minutes later, we stood together in the Willowbrook Community Centre, empty at that hour, except for the receptionist who knew me from hospital fundraisers. "What are we doing here?" Edward asked, bewildered as I led him down a hallway lined with photographs and newspaper clippings. "Looking at what grew from our broken wedding," I replied, stopping before a large framed photo from 1972. It showed me, younger and more serious, cutting a ribbon in front of what was clearly a medical facility. "This is the Willowbrook Free Clinic. I helped establish it 8 years ago. We provide care to those who can't afford the hospital." I moved to another photo, Lily at 16, surrounded by younger children. "This is the Willowbrook Youth Support Group. Lily started it after her own experiences with loss and trauma. It's helped dozens of children in the county. One by one, I showed him the visible markers of the life I had built in his absence. Not just the career and the motherhood, but the community service, the programs I'd initiated, the lives I'd touched. Not despite my pain, but because of it. "You see," I said finally, turning to face him, "what happened between us didn't just shape who I became. It rippled outward, touching others. I needed you to see that before we could talk about forgiveness. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You're saying good came from what happened, from what I did. I'm saying life is more complex than villains and victims. Edward, what Langley did was unquestionably wrong. What you did was human, flawed, misguided, but ultimately understandable. I took a deep breath, and what I did afterward, the woman I became, the choices I made, those belong to me, not to you, not to Langley, to me. We walked in silence to the small park across from the community centre, sitting on a bench beneath a flowering dogwood. A group of children played nearby, their laughter carrying on the spring breeze. I think I've spent 15 years waiting for absolution, Edward said finally. From you, from myself, even from Margaret. Though she never blamed me, he turned to face me. But seeing all this, what you've built, who you've become, I realized something important. You didn't need me to come back and explain. You healed without me. Not completely, I admitted. There was always a part of me that wondered what was so wrong with me that you could leave without a word. That wound never fully closed. There was nothing wrong with you, Amelia. Nothing at all. His voice broke. You were everything right in my life. Langley knew that. It's why his threat worked so effectively. He knew I'd do anything to protect you. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, we continued talking about our lives, our regrets, our joys, about Lily and Margaret, about the people we had become in the years of separation. Not the boy and girl who had planned to marry, but the middle-aged adults who had weathered life's storms separately. And please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to forgive someone who deeply hurt you? What helped you find that forgiveness? I read every comment, and your stories inspire me. Until next time, this is Grandma Mia sending you love and wisdom from my heart to yours.